Hi, welcome to week 4 of Rogue Cooking CSA Style. So when I picked up my box this week, I was so excited to see basil because to me basil means pesto. So today we're going to make a really simple, straightforward basil pesto. Also, you might remember last week that we shredded up some beets for future use. And so today we're going to use beets two ways. We're going to use the shredded beets in a rainbow salad, and we're also going to use cooked beets, pureed beets, in a chocolate cake. Okay, so for the basil pesto, we're going to go ahead and start by grating some cheese. I have to be honest, I'm really bad about amounts. I do most things like this that are kind of routine just to taste. And so for me, this is how much cheese I'm going to use. So for the pesto, we're now going to go ahead and just literally pull off the leaves from the whole bunch. I'm going to use the entire bundle that was in my box, and it does not have to be more complicated than this. If you want, you can feel free to chop up the whole bundle roughly with a knife, but I prefer not to have all the stems in there. I think it makes a better texture for it to just be leaves. So it's a little bit of a tedious task, but I'm just going to pull off the leaves straight into the bowl of the food processor. Okay, so to finish up the pesto, we've got the bowl full of basil leaves. That was the whole bunch in there, minus the stems and the flowers. We're also going to do 3 big fat cloves of garlic. I like a really garlicky pesto. The grated up cheese. If I had to guess, I would say that's about a half cup. A half cup of nuts. I'm using walnuts in this case, and a squeeze of lemon. We will also be using olive oil and salt and pepper to taste. Okay, so we're just going to squeeze that lemon juice right into the bowl. I go ahead and keep it simple and just put everything in the bowl at the same time. Some people like to do the hard stuff, the garlic and the nuts first. I don't think it really matters. And then you'll go ahead and top it. Partway through, I like to go ahead and scrape the bowl just to kind of get everything down where it's supposed to be, get all those flavors together. And I haven't added the salt and pepper or the olive oil yet. I like to get everything in there and then add the olive oil to get the right consistency. I don't really think you can do it wrong. A lot of olive oil works well if you're going to put it on pasta. It gets a little saucy. If you're going to use it to spread on a sandwich, you might want a little bit less olive oil. But again, I don't think you can mess it up. I'm pretty generous with the salt and pepper as well. I would, with the olive oil, start with about a 1/4 cup and go up from there just based on your own tastes. Okay, and when we're done, we have a beautiful, beautiful pesto, just delicious. You can put this in a container in the fridge and use it for a couple of days. You can put it in the freezer in portions that you know you'll use. Another great tip is to portion it out into an ice cube tray and then pop those out of the ice cube tray when they're frozen and keep them in a bag and use them individually to season soups or stews or sauces or dressings. Really, really delicious flavor. Okay, so continuing on with our chocolate cake that calls for beets. Who knew you could use vegetables in your dessert? So what we did is last time we went ahead and boiled or steamed our beets. You can also roast them. And once they were tender to a fork or the tip of a knife, I went ahead and slipped the skins off, and these were really small ones. So I'm going to go ahead and put them in the food processor. And at the same time I'm putting them in the food processor, I also am melting the chocolate for this chocolate cake. And the recipe will be posted on the CSA app. So not to worry about the amounts right now. But just in case you're wondering, it's 7 ounces of baking chocolate, about 70% cocoa. So I'm going to go ahead and puree those beets. And it's okay for them to be chunky. They don't have to be totally smooth. Pureed the beets, and it comes out as kind of a coarse puree, and I went ahead and stirred it together just to kind of bring it all together. If you don't have a way to puree them, you can also grate the cooked beets, and it works just fine. So on the stove we have the melting chocolate, and I did have to fudge the recipe a little bit. It calls for 7 ounces of baking chocolate or semi-sweet or bittersweet chocolate, and I didn't have enough, so I went ahead and substituted some cocoa with butter. And I am going to make note of that in the recipe on the app so that you can see those conversions. So it's now melted and I've turned the heat off, but I'm leaving it in the double boiler with the hot water underneath. And I'm now putting in the butter. And the suggestion is that you just set the butter room temperature, cut up into chunks, on top of the melted chocolate and let it melt itself. The recipe suggests that you not stir it very much. And then I'm going to pour over a 1/4 cup of espresso. If you don't have espresso or don't want to use it, you can use a 1/4 cup of hot water. But you do want it to be hot. And we're going to go ahead and let that melt. Okay, so the chocolate has now been removed from the hot water. And after letting it sit for just a little bit, the butter has started to melt, and now is the time to stir until it's smooth and everything is incorporated. So I'm just about there. It's really, really smooth and wonderful. I've got the espresso in here, I've got the chocolate in here, and the butter. And now I'm going to go ahead and add in the egg yolks. So we are using 5 eggs in this recipe. I brought them to room temperature on the counter and then separated them. And I'm now folding in the egg yolks only. I went ahead and whipped them with a fork a little bit to incorporate all of that liquid. And I'm now folding in gently the egg yolks. And the chocolate should be cooler than it was when it was on the heat, but it doesn't have to be completely cool. You just don't want the eggs to cook. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and fold in the pureed or shredded beets. And this is all just happening in the same pot or bowl where you did the double boil to melt the chocolate. Smells so awesome. And a lot of the sweetness is going to be coming from the beets. We are going to add a cup of sugar. And the recipe calls for superfine sugar, which is actually not that easy to find in grocery stores around here. I think it's really popular in the UK. So the recipe suggests that you just whir it in the food processor until it's really fine. So I did go ahead and do that. I have to say, when I looked at it, I couldn't really tell the difference, but just trying to follow the recipe. Okay, so I'm going to spare you the torture of watching me whip the egg whites. So I've gone ahead and done it for you, but using a standing mixer, or if you want a little arm wrist workout, you can use your whisk, and you want to just get them stiff, and go ahead and add a cup of your superfine sugar. And then go ahead and whip those up. And that is much easier. I'm just going to incorporate those in there till it's nice and thick. Going to pour it in. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and add the flour and cocoa and salt. This will be the final bit. And fold that in gently. It's really important not to overmix at this point because we want the texture of the cake to be just right. So gently incorporating it, folding it in, and then we'll pour it into the pan. Okay, so we've got a wonderful batter here that we are pouring into the pan. We have been preheating the oven at 350, and we're now going to turn it down to 325, and we're going to cook for 40 minutes until a toothpick or a fork comes out clean. Okay, so while the cake is in the oven, we're going to go ahead and finish prepping our rainbow salad. So we've got shredded beets, shredded carrot. I'm going to be prepping some chard. And for the dressing, I've got 5 tablespoons of oil. I'm using canola oil, but you could use safflower or even olive oil. I've also got a 1/3 cup of vinegar. I'm using rice vinegar, but you could use white vinegar. 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, and a tablespoon of some sort of sweetener, honey or sugar. Maple syrup would work just fine too. And I really am all about keeping things simple. So I am going ahead and whisking the dressing together in the bowl. And I'm going to go ahead and put the vegetables in on top of it and stir it together just to keep it simple. Less dishes. Okay, so the rainbow salad recipe on the app calls for cabbage, but I didn't have any more cabbage left from a couple of weeks ago, so I'm going to go ahead and use the chard that we got this week. Chard I typically cook, but if the recipe is just right, I think it can work really well raw. So I went ahead and chopped it, sliced it into ribbons. I cut out the thick stem because I don't think that would be that great raw. I did a little bit of the beginning, the tender part of the stem, but not the big thick stalks. And I then chopped the ribbons into even a finer chop. And I'm going to go ahead and put this right into my dressing. And the vinegar and the soy sauce are going to kind of soften this green, which sometimes doesn't do so well raw. So I think because of that dressing, it's going to do awesome. I'm going to go ahead and put the shredded beets and the shredded carrot on top. And I'm also going to add some herbs. In this case, I'm going to add dill, which I have dried from a past CSA box delivery. But I think you could do whatever herbs sound good to you. You could also throw in some green onions and really kind of just make this salad whatever you want it to be. Okay, so the cake is done, and I learned a little bit from this recipe. It didn't actually need 40 minutes until it was done. It only needed about 35 in my oven. And the recipe suggests that it still be a little bit wet on top, so don't use the toothpick rule that we normally use for cakes and things like that. Leave it a little bit moist and wet on top, and then we're going to let it cool. And this can be served as is. You can sprinkle powdered sugar over the top. You could make a frosting. I've seen some recipes that actually call for beets in the frosting to give it a pink color. I'm going to go ahead and make a glaze using whipped cream and chocolate that I think is going to be fabulous over it. But do with it what you will. And we've finally finished up our rainbow salad as well. It's absolutely gorgeous. I let it sit in the dressing all stirred up for about 20 to 30 minutes, and the chard got nice and soft and really, really nice. And I'm going to go ahead and add some green onions to the top of this and some walnuts. And just to finish it off on the plate, I'm going to put a few dollops of goat cheese. We'll have a beautiful rainbow salad. So there you have it. You got pesto, you got rainbow salad, you got beet chocolate cake. What more can you need? Thanks so much. See you next week.